Okay, so let's make this messier. By 2008, if you look at this cartoon right here, by 2008, some of the problems of that strategy start to come up. So the strategy sort of assumes that there's a finite number of terrorists out there, and they're sort of running this organization. And so if we don't let them get away with terrorism, we increase the number of troops in the Middle East, and then we, like this cartoon says, we essentially draw them to those troops, and then we take out those terrorists there, where we sort of have a better handle on things, and say back here in the United States where you can't really sort of run counterterrorism operations very simply with military. We'll eliminate those terrorists and everything will be cool, right? We'll weaken their organizations. Well, it turns out that that's not what happens at all. Is we show up and we increase the number of people in the Middle East, number of troops in the Middle East, and yes, it does actually attract more terrorist attacks on those troops. But interestingly enough, as the more that we do, the more attacks and more terrorists that are out there. Actually, the more organizations that are out there. It actually proliferates them. There's not a finite number of terrorists. The number of terrorists or potential terrorists is growing, 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 which really puts that other model it makes it very more problematic. So here's another model that comes out in 2008. Audrey Cronin. She's, again, she is probably not like the key person in this, but she articulates this well, and she talks about some of the many theories we're getting at this point. Because by 2008, so 2001 is when the 9/11 happens. By 2008, you got a bunch of academics who have shifted what they're doing to terrorism. You have the military that's shifted to terrorism. Everybody's thinking about terrorism now, so you're getting more and more studies, more and more reports. And when you have more and more voices like that, you're going to get more and more theories, and it's going to become more confusing. And one of the things that she does pretty well is kind of draw these things together. So what she's going to argue is terrorism is not monolithic. And when I say that, what monolithic means here is there's not just one cause. Not just one cause. You can't treat terrorism like it's one size fits all, like the compellence argument of Pape does, essentially. Yeah, terrorists trying to achieve this goal, stop it. Don't let them achieve the goal, and terrorism goes away. It's not nearly that simple. There's a lot of motivations going on here. Let me just walk you through a few of the main ones. So, compellence tries to change state policy. In other words, the argument of Pape is that the reason why the terrorists are doing what they're doing is to try to get state policy to change. They're saying, right now the policy is for the U.S. troops to be in the Middle East, and so if we use terrorist attacks, they will change state policy and pull troops out of the Middle East. Great. This model that she's talking about that's not really what's going on. What she says is going on, or at least what more recent studies have shown, is that the act of terrorism itself, the audience is not the United States or the United States population. The audience is, let's say, the Iraq population. It's trying to win the local people over. And you say, how can blowing things up win people over? Here's why. If you have fear in the population, so the United States population, then the government's going to respond with force. So, in other words, it's the complete opposite of the compellence argument. It says, look, Al-Qaeda attacks the United States on 9/11. It knows very well that the people in the United States are going to be not saying, oh, let's get out of the Middle East. It's going to say, we're super pissed off, and they're going to give the green light to the government to go over there and start blowing things up. So the government, the U.S. government's going to respond with force. Fantastic. That's going to help terrorist strategies. Now, I'm going to talk about how it helps terrorist strategies here in a second. But the important thing to say here is that in this model, the terrorist activity, we say the terrorism is working. When we say it's working because the government responds with force. The U.S. government responds with force. This is, again, if you read Bin Laden's going to be saying, I want you guys out of the Middle East. But at the same time, another writings that he has, this is a self-described project, is to get the United States to act, to overreact, I guess is the best way to say that. It's not about wanting the United States to pull out. It's about wanting the United States to overreact. Now, again, you're going to say, why would, that makes no sense. Why would Al-Qaeda want the United States to overreact and start bombing the crap out of the Middle East? That makes no sense whatsoever. Let's talk about it. There's three things going on here. One is, it's called provocation. It's where you try to force a state, and again, let's just think here, United States, to react with vigorous action that undercuts its legitimacy. In other words, you could also look back, by 2008, you could look back and say, okay, so the United States was attacked in 9/11, 2001, and then it helped invade Afghanistan, and then it invaded Iraq, and now it's bombing places all over the world. And while people were on the U.S.'s side in 2001, by 2008, people are looking at the U.S. as a big bully out there. Like, okay, ease up. Yes, you got hit on 9/11. Take it down a notch. That's plenty. You're overreacting. And so now U.S. actions in the world are not seen as legitimate anymore. So the success of this depends on state reaction. So in other words, you're trying to sort of poke the bear, and then people won't think that the bear is, legitimate anymore. I guess that's the best way. I totally mixed my analogy there. Whatever. So that's one way to look at this. Another way to look at this, and again, these are all overlapping things, but just sort of trying to explain why would a terrorist organization want the United States to overreact. Another thing is mobilization, where you're trying to recruit and rally the masses to the cause. So again, when I said before that this sort of model says the audience is really the local people, the people in Iraq, the people in Afghanistan. Because here's the deal. So right now the United States is in 2001, the United States is in the Middle East. And the people there, it's kind of, the people in Iraq and Iran, and maybe not Iran, but Iraq and Afghanistan, all these places, they're a little ambivalent, okay? Saudi Arabia, they're a little ambivalent. On the one hand, they don't like the United States being there, just because who really wants a foreign force there, foreign troops over there in the Middle East. On the other hand, it's not like, they're just kind of hanging out doing stuff. They're not really harming me or my family, so yeah, I'm torn on this either way. Maybe I like it, maybe I don't, but whatever. I'll just keep on doing my thing. What this does is when the U.S. essentially overreacts and starts doing things that are sort of more visibly and more openly, overtly hostile, threatening, violent, the average person in the street can't just sit back and not have an opinion on this. So you're trying to recruit and rally the masses. The audience is these potential supporters and international supporters as well, like even, let's say, Muslims back in the United States who could be on your side if they saw the United States overreacting. The analogy here is what we call terrorist groups as social movements. It's the same sort of idea where you're trying to rally supporters, both locally, internationally, all that kind of stuff, but you're trying to rally supporters. And, I guess an analogy might, no, I don't want to make that analogy. If you want people, for example, to get excited about, to be out on the streets marching about environmental issues, it's probably going to take something like like a factory doing big pollution in your area or something like that. It's going to require something that's going to mobilize the people to show up there and act. And essentially what this model is saying is by getting the United States to overreact, that's going to mobilize the people back home. So again, this you don't need to know this chart at all, but again, this is just sort of a way of trying to map out what are the factors that underlie public support for terrorism or insurgency. It's hard, for example, in the United States for us to imagine, why would anybody support a terrorist organization? But that's just because we're not the targets of that, right? The targets of that would be things, about, like in particular, I want to just point out this, the perceived legitimacy of the violence. If people see the United States as being not just sort of a neutral force, but as something that is there and acting more aggressively or not having legitimacy itself, then the terrorist group or the group that opposes the United States, then their legitimacy rises. And that's part of the idea here, is if you can reduce the legitimacy of the United States acting in these areas, you increase your own legitimacy. And if your terrorist act can be in such a way to sort of get them to do this, that can be a beneficial thing to you, and more people will show up and support you. Again, you don't need a lot of people. It's still terrorism. I mean, it's not like you need thousands and thousands and thousands of people to support you, but one, you need those thousands and thousands to not actively oppose you, and then two, a few additional people, and that's going to be very helpful for your organization. One more element, and that's polarization, is to try to divide the population and delegitimize the government. And that can be both the U.S. government and the government, like say Saudi Arabia, that's supporting the U.S. government. This is often used to incite class warfare, well, let me give you a good example of this. When there is a heightened threat to security for some reason, like again, there's a terrorist attack like 9/11 or something like that. What happens is, in almost every population, this drives leaders and businesses to the right. It drives them to be a little more pro-law and order, a little less, let's protect the rights of people. Because when there's a security situation, like we can't fool around with this anymore, we can't assume the best, we have to assume the worst, so there's this sort of shift to the right. What that then usually means is the government is going to crack down on dissent and protest. So if you don't like what's happening, then the government's going to see you more and more as being on the side of those who want to cause problems, even if you're not. You're just fighting for rights and things like that. And then what's going to happen is the population is going to have to choose between, have to choose between not the terrorist cause and legitimate government, but the terrorist cause and this government that is starting to be more repressive. And I'll give you an example. In the United States after 9/11, we passed this thing called the Usa Patriot Act. And again, this was a way of trying to get more information so we would know more about who was potentially going to support terrorists and who wasn't, blah, blah, blah. Just some of the things this does, it allows wiretapping. It allows more searches, which are going to obviously, again, even though racial profiling is not okay, it's probably not a big surprise that if you looked like you had Arabic ancestry or something like that from the Middle East, you were probably going to have more searches than the person who didn't look like they would. And so that sort of checks in on the rights and says, is that okay? But again, the more worried people are about terrorist activity, the more they're willing to say, go ahead and do that. But obviously that's going to harm other people. Even to the point, USA Patriot Act even said, that they can search library databases and find out what books people checked out. I mean, it's at that level. And to a certain extent, there's going to be people who are saying, yeah, do that, keep us safe. And you're going to have another group on the other side who's going to say, hold on, you're totally violating my rights on this is not cool. But again, your choices, there's usually not third choices in these things where it's like, you're either this, or this. It's usually like, it comes down to two choices. So if I don't like what the oppressive government's doing, does that mean I'm on the side of terrorists? Probably not, but that becomes how it gets seen. And you start to polarize the population itself, both inside the country and with these external countries like the United States, Europe, things like that. Again, all those things create more room, more legitimacy for the terrorist group to do what they're trying to do to achieve their goals. And all this is driven by the fact, not that the U.S. does what the terrorist group wants them to do, but the U.S. overreacts, and it's going to capitalize on that overreaction. All right, so that brings us to the last slide here, Cronin's findings. And again, this is kind of where we are today. And again, she's not dominant. What we have is we have this big debate going on between Cronin and Pape, really. And I'll show you how this kind of plays out. So Cronin's findings are, democracies are as likely to respond to terrorism with repressive measures as autocracies. Usually, like, for example, when the military government in Myanmar sees that there are people out in the streets, they crack down on this. Turns out that when there is these threats of terrorism, democracies are as likely to use repressive measures. Maybe not sort of firing things in the streets. The repressive measures may be different, but they'll still be repressive measures. So democracies aren't immune from this. Because force is often seen as strategic catharsis, meaning when we've just been hit on 9/11 and 3,000 people are killed, we have to react in some way. And how does the United States react? What do we have? We only have these military options. So we're going to hit back, and we're going to hit back hard. You don't hit us, because if you do, you're going to get the smackdown. There's this huge domestic pressure to, quote unquote, do something. It may not be what everybody wants in America wants to have happen, but everybody wants something to happen. To not do something, to essentially sit back, is not going to be okay. And we get this, again, I think I brought this up before in class, the modified Albright question. Madeleine Albright, when she was meeting with the incoming, she's the outgoing Secretary of State for Bill Clinton, and the incoming Secretary of State was Colin Powell. And Madeleine Albright said to him, look, this was after Rwanda and all that, he said, look, she said, we have all this military power, and we're not stopping famines, we're not stopping genocide. What do we have this for if we can't stop those things? And the modified Albright question is this. We have all this military power. We're the strongest country in the world. If we can't stop things like 9/11 from happening, what's the use of all this stuff? So use it. And that's kind of what then happens. So if she's correct, if this is kind of what is driving terrorism, or again, many things, many sort of pieces of terrorism for a lot of different reasons, what are the counterterrorism policy goals? The big one is don't overreact to terrorism. That's really the big takeaway, is the terrorism is designed to get the state to overreact. Great. You understand the problem here though, right? I don't know if you can see this right now. Under Pape, the way that he sort of talks about this, what's the best way to do counterterrorism? Don't give them what they want. And what he thinks they want is they want the United States out of the Middle East. So not only should you stay in the Middle East, you should increase troops in the Middle East. But the Cronin argument is the exact opposite. Not that you don't give them what they want, but if Pape is saying, leave troops there and put more troops over there, Cronin's saying, don't do anything. Just let it be. I mean, it was a terrorist act. Who cares? I mean, not who cares. Who cares is not the right thing. But it was a terrorist act, and the only thing you're doing by increasing troops over there and sort of smacking back is you're creating more people who want to smack the United States back. So don't do that. The counterterrorism strategies against compellence backfire against leverage and vice versa. And this is where you get this huge counterterrorism debate in terms of what should be done. Because it's not just a question of should we use X number of troops or X plus Y number of troops? Should we do this? Should we do that? These usually tend to be complete opposites. If you do one thing, the other group is going to say, the other sort of counterterrorism group is going to say, that's going to make things worse. And so you get actually fluctuating policies where someone will come in and we'll do this policy and then we'll do it the other way. And you actually get the worst of both worlds rather than the best of both worlds. So coming back to your particular conflict, the conflict journal that you're working on, the conflict that you guys are writing your paper on, what's the best thing that should be done when there is violence that is being done by one of the non-state actor groups? Do you hit back or do you not hit back? A lot of that depends upon what you think the goal of the terrorism or the action, the violence is. So understanding that's going to be a big role to play. It's not as simple as just saying you smack them back. There's got to be some sort of theoretical reasons why that's the most effective way to do things. All right, that's it. I think I went on longer than I really wanted to, but that's okay. I just want to have you guys watch as much stuff. This will be all you'll do. So that's it. See ya.